All right. We are back with another episode of Dharma Talk. It's been a little while on this one. It's been an incredibly busy week. It has been an incredibly tumultuous week for me. I feel like it's been really, it has been trying my patience pretty substantially and trying more than just that. But we're here once again with the Dharma. This part of the Dharma Talk series is a guided reading and commentary of The Heart of the Buddhist Teaching by Thich Nhat Hanh. And we are finally now getting into the Noble Eightfold Path. Last time we did this, there was a bit of an audio discrepancy and some issues with one of the recordings. However, the section that it was a recording on, I feel like was kind of getting into a sort of redundancy. A couple of the members in the chat today were there for that one, and it was kind of just Thich Nhat Hanh reiterating the same concept over and over, and it was definitely not the most ideal listening material. We can leave it at that. But the Noble Eightfold Path is very much what even like skeptics of him believe his coverage on in this book is pretty good. So we'll be doing that. But before we get into the reading itself, today is actually a holiday in Buddhism. It's not something I've had the chance to adhere to or anything because, yeah, shocker, living in rural Wisconsin doesn't give you a lot of access to the Sangha. So we've got it pulled up here. So today is the holiday of Vesak. Vesak is a sort of pretty widely practiced holiday. Some people call it just Buddha Day in like short. It's one of the major holidays that most Buddhist practicing countries will actually adhere to. And it's something that I'm not super familiar with myself, honestly. So we're going to give a little look over this since it is indeed today for most of the places. It's based on calendar systems that do not adhere perfectly with their current ones. So much like with things like Easter, Passover, lunar holiday calendar systems, it can be off. But for most places, it is indeed May 12th. So a brief synopsis of this. Celebration of the Buddha's birthday typically occurs around the traditional timing of Vesak, while the Buddha's awakening and death are celebrated as separate holidays that occur at other times in the calendar as Bodhi Day and Nibbana or Nirvana Day. In South Asian tradition, Vesak is celebrated on the full moon day of the Vaishakha month. The Vesak Day marks birth, enlightenment, and ultimate death of the Buddha. So it's meant to be a sort of like celebration of the transitionary process and then obviously the enlightenment process. So we'll see what else is done for the celebration. Once again, I'm pretty new to this one. I've not heard much about it. Yeah, so it seems like it's a lot of praising the three jewels, which if you're not familiar, the three jewels is kind of this it's the key fundamentals to what makes a Buddhist community and like being a Buddhist. To consider yourself to be a Buddhist, you have to what is referred to as take refuge in the three jewels. The Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Sangha being the community. In some places, the Sangha more refers to like the monastic community, but that's not always necessarily the case. So it seems like it's pretty key on gift giving, paying homage. Let's see if we can get some pictures of what some celebrations look like before we get into it. Yeah, so we got a lot of kind of group meditation processes, group karmic offerings. This is one of those events that I hope to be able to attend at some point. I imagine one of the smaller Buddhist communities, within like an hour drive of me probably had something going on, but kind of can't do that during workday. But that being said, that is indeed Buddha Day, and then we will get into the reading now. So we are on part 2, the Noble Eightfold Path. Thich Nhat Hanh gives an introductory section, so we'll start with this one. When the Buddha was 80 years old and about to pass away, a young man named Sapada came to see him. Ananda, the Buddha's attendant, thought it would be too exhausting for his master to see anyone. But the Buddha overheard Supanda's request and said, "Ananda, please invite him in." Even as he was dying, the Buddha was willing to give an interview. Subhadda said, "World-honored one, are there other religious teachers in Magadha and Koshala fully enlightened?" The Buddha knew he had only a short time to live and that answering such a question would be a waste of precious moments. When you have the opportunity to ask a teacher about the Dharma, ask a question that can change your life. The Buddha replied, Subhadda, it is not important whether they are fully enlightened. The question is whether you want to liberate yourself. If you do, practice the Noble Eightfold Path. Wherever the Noble Eightfold Path is practiced, joy, peace, and insight are there. The Buddha offered the Eightfold Path in his first Dharma talk. He continued to teach the Eightfold Path for 45 years. And in his last Dharma talk spoken to Subhadda, he offered the Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, right thinking, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right diligence, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Arya Ashtangika Marga, a noble path of 8 limbs, suggests the interbeing nature of these 8 elements of the path. Each limb contains all of the other 7. Please use your intelligence to apply the elements of the Noble Eightfold Path in your daily life. Yeah, so for those of you unaware, the typical symbol of Buddhism is what to a sort of like unfamiliar viewer might see as being kind of like a... I feel like it reminds me of like a sailor wheel. You know, like something that you would see on like a ship. And so I got that on screen now. It is basically a wheel, the wheel of the Dharma, and then it has the different spokes. And as you can see, they all cross points in the middle. They all have that interconnectedness. You cannot have one without the others, and you cannot have the others without each independent piece. It's important to have all of them. All right, and that is the quick introductory segment. Does anybody in the call have any questions on this one? Not a super complicated part, but we'll bring it to the group anyway.
I found it pretty informative for like a beginner like myself.
Sure. Yeah, I think another key distinction that is brought up in this passage is the idea that, like, your teacher does not have to be fully enlightened for it to still be able to be a useful experience if it brings about teaching the principles that are outlined in the Noble Eightfold Path. These are principles that you can see in a lot of different religious traditions. You know, they're not like they're not exclusive to Buddhism. It's a broader concept that can apply to many things. And even someone who is, you know, strongly practicing one faith may still gain sort of benefits in a Buddhist perspective by doing that sort of those principles correctly in a way that is, you know, reducing harm for others. So that we'll move on to chapter 9 and getting into it, right view. The first practice of the Noble Eightfold Path is right view. Right view is, first of all, a deep understanding of the Four Noble Truths, our suffering, the making of our suffering, the fact that our suffering can be transformed, and the path of transformation. The Buddha said that right view is to have faith and confidence that there are people who have been able to transform their suffering. Venerable Shariputra added that right view is knowing which of the 4 kinds of nutriments that we have ingested have brought about what has to come to be. Shariputra described right view as the ability to distinguish wholesome roots from unwholesome roots. In each of us, there are wholesome and unwholesome roots, or seeds, in the depths of our consciousness. If you are a loyal person, it is because the seed of loyalty is in you. But don't think that the seed of betrayal isn't also in you. If you live in an environment where your seed of loyalty is watered, you will be a loyal person. But if your seed of betrayal is watered, you may betray even those you love. You'll feel guilty about it, but if the seed of betrayal in you becomes stronger, you may do it. So a lot of the idea of karma specifically in Buddhism has to do with, like, there's that metaphor of, again, sowing the seeds of things, right? So we may have this seed of some sort of negative aspect to us, but if we do not nourish it, it will not be as apparent within us. And if we nourish positive attributes, that is something that will then grow and benefit us as well. So consider it a lot less of like, this isn't the same as something like a sin where it's kind of like, it's an end all or be all. It's one of those, as you nourish things, as you generate it, as you cultivate it, that attribute is brought about in your life. The practice of mindfulness helps us identify all seeds in our store consciousness. and water the ones that are the most wholesome. When one person comes up to us, the very sight of him makes us uncomfortable. But when somebody else walks by, we like her right away. Something in each of them touches a seed in us. If we love our mother deeply but sense tense every time we think of our father, it is natural that when we see a young lady who looks like our mother, we will appreciate her. And when we see a man who evokes the memory of our father, we will feel uncomfortable. In this way, we can see the seeds that are in us, the seeds of love for our mother, the seeds of hurt vis-a-vis our father. When we become aware of the seeds in our storehouse, we will not be surprised by our own behavior and behavior of others. So he mentions the term storehouse. And this one is kind of tricky to explain from a beginner perspective. So in Buddhism, there is that idea of the non-self. There is no contiguous soul that exists. It is ever-changing, it is impermanent, and it is comprised of many composite pieces. But there is this understanding of like a storehouse of karma, a mind stream of karma, this idea of like a temporary continuity between lives or between one's own current existence, and that's how you possess those karmic seeds that are nourished or whatnot. It's a bit more advanced than this section is necessary, but I just wanted to give that info out there as it was presented. I do find it funny how Thich Nhat Hanh is basically just describing like, yeah, the karmic seeds, bad vibes. You can get bad vibes from people. It's kind of the way I view it. Does anybody have any questions or comments so far? No? Okay. We'll continue. The seed of Buddhahood, the capacity to wake up and understand things as they are, is also present in each of us. When we join our palms and bow to another person, we acknowledge the seed of Buddhahood in him or her. When we bow to a child this way, we help him or her grow up beautifully with confidence. If you plant corn, corn will grow. If you plant wheat, wheat will grow. If you act in a wholesome way, you will be happy. If you act in an unwholesome way, you water the seeds of craving, anger, and violence in yourself. Right view is to recognize which seeds are wholesome and to encourage those seeds to be watered. This is called selective touching. We need to discuss and share with each other to deepen our understandings of this practice into practice of the 5 mindfulness trainings, especially the 5th about the foods we ingest. At the base of our views are our perceptions. In Chinese, the upper part of the character for perception is mark, sign, or appearance, and the lower part is mind or spirit. Perceptions always have a mark, and in many cases that mark is illusory. The Buddha advised us to not be fooled by what we perceive. He told Subhuti, where there is perception, there is deception. The Buddha also taught on many occasions that most of our perceptions are erroneous, and that most of our suffering comes from the wrong perceptions. We have to ask ourselves again and again, am I sure? Until we see clearly, our wrong perceptions will prevent us from having right view. So I think this concept has been a pretty big part in my own sort of path in understanding right view. And in a weird way, I do feel like some of my, more advanced sort of like psychedelic inspired meditative states has, provided a lot of insight into this. The idea of like certainty of things, being aware that perception is what makes up the way that we view the world, but perception is so obviously malleable, it is so obviously fallible. I think a good example of this is like with eyewitness testimony. If you're at all familiar with criminology, you'll know that, eyewitness testimony is unambiguously one of the worst forms of testimony. It is often wrong. Our memories are often tainted by things in the present that sort of, our emotions are how we're primed to view things in the past can fully affect the way that we even think of the past. So with that in mind, it's very challenging to even perceive of perception. It's a sort of paradox in a way. So I find for thinking of ways to engage in right view correctly is to operate with a sort of open skepticism where you continue with your understanding of things, but be willing and open to realize that, hey, I could have it wrong. It could be in an inaccurate perception. and just hold this sort of loose skepticism with things, where it's not getting in the way of you actually functioning or holding beliefs, but you're still able to allow yourself to be challenged when available. A key way to determine this is the idea of consensus. If you perceive something a certain way, try to get that same perception checked by other people around you, especially if they were there for the event that you're trying to perceive. Things like that can certainly help you, view things in a way that is appropriate. Anybody have any questions on this section?
So you're talking about like planting these karmic seeds or whatever, and they kind of like compose your being. And I have a question that's somewhat related to that. This kind of sounds like it's like a trying to shoot pinholes or like make someone slip up question, but it's not. It's just genuinely been confusing the shit out of me for a minute.
Okay.
So like, how is one supposed to like love and trust themselves while not believing in a self? Because like a lot of me gets it in like a statistical like scientific level. Like I feel like I low-key agree, like the ego is illusory, but like then I sit there and I'm really confused because like what am I putting my weight behind here? Like if I'm not like I don't know. Maybe it's a stupid question, but
no, I think it's fair. It's one of those like the key distinction behind no self as a Buddhist like concept. And Thich Nhat Hanh will cover this later in the book in far more detail, is again making that distinction between like we're working from a very sort of Buddhism arose in an era of a lot of rivaling ideas in theology in the Vedic tradition in India. And so no self is far more important as a specific categorical term in opposition to the idea of there being an immortal self. So I think a key way that you can kind of operate with that is losing attachment for the idea of you even having a fixed self. You are a process. You are ever changing. Part of it is just acknowledging that change is occurring. You can be, to some extent, satisfied or unsatisfied with that change. But if you're obsessed with the idea of you having to be one way or not, it's going to bring about suffering. So it's operating this sort of loose ambiguity to where you're just not especially obsessed with oneself. There's a very excellent video I saw on this subject a while ago. I'm trying to think of what it was called, but a key thing to go for is almost like a sort of like, not an indifference, but just like realizing that you can be flawed, realizing that you can change, realizing that there is change in all of us, and just accepting that as it goes. It's a fluid process. It's not as concrete as many would want, but much is the same with life. It is still an impermanence factor. It is still a codependent origination factor behind the no self. It is tricky. I think for newcomers, no self is by far the most difficult to sort of glom onto with any degree of confidence there. Hopefully, as we get further in, that'll be elucidated more. Do you have any follow-up on that one?
I thought that was a pretty good answer, man. I was just confused, like how to kind of, like you kind of just simplified it to a much better degree. I was just convoluting the details a lot in my head, but that makes a lot more sense when you relate it back, especially like Vedic religion and stuff.
Yeah, I think another part to consider is like the need for you to like have that self-love, that thing to fall back on. That is a form of craving. You're craving constancy, you're craving consistency, and so that just, it doesn't exist, so it's craving an illusory state. It can make you uncomfortable, but that makes sense. Of course it would. It is suffering. It is dukkha. as far as like how karma forms and the idea of the mind stream, this is related to what you're talking about, that idea of like there being some sort of continuousness. The mind stream is kind of perceived as like this sort of, I like to think of it as almost like karmic gravity, where like as craving builds, you sort of form this sort of like glomming on effect where it will lump together, and then that will have some sort of state that continues. So it's like, I guess you could crave for the consistency of that, but it also too is illusory. It is impermanent. Shit's complicated. That's one of those things, like a lot with Buddhism that is both very, the ideas of the self in Buddhism can be quite uncomfortable. You know, it's not as simple as like a Christianity where like, oh, you have an immortal soul and it's going to be there forever, either in heaven or hell. You know, like there can be comfort in that constancy, but it's observably just not the case. There is nothing that does not change. Everything is constantly changing. Does anybody else have any questions or follow-ups on that one?
Honestly, I think everything changing is better than everything staying the same.
Yeah, it's one of those like.
But it's like there's an upside and downside to it.
For sure. Yeah, I always found. I was raised very agnostic in my youth, and when I first started like. I like never was taken to church, basically ever. The first time I went to an actual Christian church was for a funeral when I was like 22. Otherwise, never attended a church service. So my knowledge of Christianity was only from like the vague sort of cultural osmosis. And so when I was maybe like 10 or 11, I had like a pretty bad existential crisis. And when I was actually like trying to learn about Christianity, the idea of the immortal soul was actually deeply, deeply uncomfortable to me. The idea of it just persisting indefinitely was very disconcerting. So yeah, I can understand why you might prefer there being that change, you know, it being an ebb and flow. Hello, welcome back, chatter. Nice to see you stop by. I am holding up. It's been a pretty bad week, but we are on the Dharma now. That can be a topic for another time. Any other questions? All right, we'll continue. To perceive always means to perceive something. We believe that the object of our perception is outside of the subject, but that is not correct. When we perceive the moon is us. When we smile to our friend is also us, because she is the object of our perception. When we perceive a mountain, the mountain is the object of our perception. When we perceive the moon is the object of our perception. When we say, I can see my consciousness in the flower, it means we can see the cloud, the sunshine, the earth, and the minerals in it. But how can we see our consciousness in a flower? The flower is our consciousness. It is the object of our perception. It is our perception. To perceive means to perceive something. Perception means coming into existence of the perceiver and the perceived. The flower that we are looking at is part of our consciousness. The idea of our consciousness is outside of the flower has to be removed. It is impossible to have a subject without an object. It is impossible to remove one and retain the other. So this paragraph kind of gets into the whole mind-only school of Buddhism. The idea that like much of reality outside of us is that of the illusory nature of perception. But I think in a more, obvious way, one of those key sort of things that you can give to understand this is explain the color red to a person who has been blind since birth. It's impossible. It's meaningless. That idea of red is a series of perceptions that we've attained associated with a word, and that word has associated meanings. Red may be different for a person who is colorblind. Red may be different between you and me. We could have debates on shades of red. It is all perception. It is all illusory. These terms, these concepts are only useful insofar as it is, actually beneficial to communication. And it's not wrong to have that, term for communication, but we have to understand that it is still illusory. The idea that it is a constant is not It's not real. It's illusion. It is purely perception. The source of our perception, our way of seeing, lies in our store consciousness. If 10 people look at a cloud, there will be 10 different perceptions of it. Whether it is perceived as a dog, a hammer, or a coat depend on our mind. Our sadness, our memories, our anger, our perceptions carry with them all the errors of subjectivity. Then we praise, blame, condemn, or complain depending on our perceptions. But our perceptions are made of our afflictions, craving, anger, ignorance, wrong view, and prejudice. Whether we are happy or we suffer depends largely on our perceptions. It is important to look at our perceptions and know their source. So, I don't recall if this sort of parable is explicitly Buddhist. I've heard it in a couple contexts. I'm going to look it up real quick and see if it, the origin. But it's the idea of a bunch of blind monks and an elephant. Here we are. All right, so this is the parable. All right, it is apparently shared in quite a few of them. So we'll read it over here because I feel like it's quite relevant to this as well. A group of blind men heard that a strange animal called an elephant has been brought to the town, but none of them were aware of its shape and form. Out of curiosity, they said, "We must inspect and know it by touch, of which we are capable." So they sought it out, and when they found it, they groped it about. The first person whose hand landed on the trunk said, "This being is like a thick snake." For another one whose hand reached its ear, it seemed like a kind of fan. As for another person whose hand was upon its leg, said, "The elephant is a pillar like a tree trunk." The blind man who placed his hand upon its side said, "The elephant is a wall." Another who felt its tail described it as a rope. The last felt its tusk, stating that the elephant is that which is hard, smooth, and like a spear. So the key distinction here is that the way that we engaged in it, the way that we perceived it, is heavily dependent upon the conditions by which we arose to it. They each engaged in the same thing in different ways, but perceived it very, very differently. Same is true with how Thich Nhat Hanh references the cloud. You all could be looking at the cloud, but how you see the cloud is based upon all of the aspects that have made you you up until this point. All of that baggage, all of that memory. We have an idea of happiness. We believe that only certain conditions will make us happy, but it is often our very idea of happiness that prevents us from being happy. We have to look deeply into our perceptions in order to become free of them. Then, what has been a perception becomes an insight, a realization of the path. This is neither perception nor non-perception. It is a clear vision, seeing things as they are. Our happiness and the happiness of those around us depend on our degree of right view. Touching reality deeply, knowing what is going on inside and outside of ourselves, is the way to liberate ourselves from suffering that is caused by wrong perceptions. Right view is not an ideology, a system, or even a path. It is an insight we have into the reality of life, a living insight that fills us with the understanding of peace and love. All right, we had a couple paragraphs there. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
I just thought that elephant thing reminded me of world religion, actually.
Yeah, so often that I've heard that before, where people compare it to that. The idea that we're all grasping at a sort of general pantheism, but the way that we're engaging in it is different.
Precisely.
Yeah, I'm curious if it mentions that on the page. Let's see. No, not directly. Anybody else have anything they'd like to say? All right, we'll continue. Sometimes we see our children doing things that we know will cause them to suffer in the future, but when we try to tell them, they won't listen. All we can do is to stimulate the seeds of right view in them, and then later, in a difficult moment, they may benefit from our guidance. We cannot explain an orange to someone who has never tasted it. No matter how well we describe it, we cannot give someone else the direct experience. He has to taste it for himself. As soon as we say a single word, he is already caught. Right view cannot be described. We can only point in the correct direction. Right view cannot even be transmitted by a teacher. A teacher can help us identify the seed of right view that is already in our garden and help us have the confidence to practice, to entrust the seed to the soil of our daily life. But we are the gardener. We have to learn how to water the wholesome seeds that are in us so they will bloom into the flowers of right view. The instrument for watering wholesome seeds is mindful living, mindful breathing, mindful walking, living each moment of our day in mindfulness. At a peaceful rally in Philadelphia in 1966, a reporter asked me, "Are you from North or South Vietnam?" If I had said I was from the North, he would have thought I was pro-communist. If I had said I was from the South, he would have thought I was pro-American. So I told him I am from the center. I wanted to help him let go of his notions and encounter the reality that was right in front of him. This is the language of Zen. A Zen monk saw a beautiful goose fly by, and he wanted to share this joy with his elder brother who was walking beside him. But at that moment, the other monk had bent down to remove a pebble from his sandal. By the time he looked up, the goose had already flown by. He asked, "What did you want me to see?" But the younger monk could only remain silent. Master Taishu said, "As long as the tree is behind you, you can only see its shadow. If you want to touch the reality, you have to turn around." Image teaching uses words and ideas. Substance teaching communicates by the way you live. If you come to the Plum Village for one day, you have an idea about Plum Village. But that idea isn't really Plum Village. You might say, "I've been to Plum Village," but in fact, you've really only been to your idea of Plum Village. Your idea might be slightly better than that of someone who has never been there, but it is still only an idea. It is not the true Plum Village. Your concept of perception of reality is not reality. When you are caught in your perceptions and idea, you lose reality. So for reference, if you're not familiar, Plum Village is Thich Nhat Hanh's sort of retreat site. It's kind of like his location. I don't recall where it's located in. We'll pull it up. Let's see. Alright, so it seems like the Plum Village is in France, but there are multiple smaller, quote-unquote, hamlets or other smaller monasteries that are throughout the world. Alright, to practice...
There's one in upstate New York.
Is there? Okay, I believe it.
I don't know if it's Plum Village specifically, but similar teachings.
Yeah, there's a chance it's associated with him. Yeah, there are quite a few different places that are associated with him under that naming. To practice is to go beyond ideas, so you can arrive at the suchness of things. No idea is the path of non-perception. As long as there is an idea, there is no reality, no truth. No idea means no wrong idea, no wrong perception. It does not mean no mindfulness. Because of mindfulness, when something is right, we know it is right. And when something is wrong, we know it is wrong. We are practicing sitting meditation, and we see a bowl of tomato soup in our mind's eye. So we think that is wrong practice, but we are supposed to be mindful of our breathing. But if we practice mindfulness, we will say, "I am breathing in and I am thinking about tomato soup." That is right mindfulness already. Righteousness or wrongness is not objective, it is subjective. Yeah, so I think the core distinction of subjectivity being sort of the end-all be-all is very important. It goes to that concept that objectivity is illusory. It's not real. It's how we engage within it. There may be things that we believe to be objective, but how we perceive that concept, say like laws of physics. Laws of physics may be consistent to our understanding, but the way that we perceive or grasp that concept, that is subjective. Just tell that to all the flat earthers who don't understand what gravity is. That's its whole own rabbit hole. Relatively speaking, there are right views and there are wrong views, but if we look more deeply, we see that all views are wrong views. No view can ever be the truth. It is just from one point. That's why it is called a point of view. If we go to another point, we will see things differently and realize that our first view was not entirely right. Buddhism is not a collection of views. It is a practice to help us eliminate wrong views. The quality of our views can always be improved. From the viewpoint of ultimate reality, right view is the absence of all views. When we begin the practice, our view is a vague idea about the teachings. But conceptual knowledge is never enough. The seeds of right view, the seed of Buddhahood, are in us, but they are obscured by so many layers of ignorance, sorrow, and disappointment. We have to put our views into practice. In the process of learning, reflecting, and practicing, our views become increasingly wise, based on our real experience. When we practice right mindfulness, we see the seed of Buddhahood in everyone, including ourselves. This is right view. Sometimes it is described as the mother of all Buddhas, the energy of love and understanding that has the power to free us. When we practice mindful living, our right view will blossom, and all the other elements of the path in us will flower also. The 8 practices of the Noble Eightfold Path nourish each other. As our view becomes more right, the other elements of the Eightfold Path in us also deepen. Right speech is based on right view, and it also nourishes right view. Right mindfulness and right concentration strengthen and deepen right view. Right action has to be based on right view. Right livelihood clarifies right view. Right view is both a cause and an effect of all other elements of the path. All right, and that concludes the section on right view. Any last topics, questions, or discussion pieces from the people in the chat or in the call?
So that last section you were kind of going through is a little denser, so I was mostly just kind of listening. But
fair enough.
Like what he was getting at was like, was he like saying you can't like full it, because he said like the right view is no views, right? Is that like saying you need to experience it like through action to like truly understand, or like?
So that can certainly be a part of it. I believe in his phraseology, he's more meaning to sort of get to the heart of like, if you believe in something extremely concretely based on your perception, and you believe it to be one distinct entity, that is false, it is illusory. So by holding a sort of mindful skepticism of your own perception and comparing it to that of, contrasting elements, holding that sort of cautiousness with being concrete in a particular view, that is the way that you can engage in right view. Recognizing that as thoughts enter you, as you are mindful of the way that you perceive of things, that they may be false, they may be altered, they may be based on other aspects. Getting into the no-self element, your perceptions are based on composite pieces. Are those composite pieces grounded? Or are they also heavily skewed or manipulated by your own illusory thoughts? It is very tricky threading that needle. But a lot of it just comes down to the fact that, like, you cannot be 1000% certain of anything, and maintaining the understanding that much of life is subjective perception, you can then pursue down the path of right view. Does that elucidate things a little bit?
Yeah, dude, I just love how this religion is, like, so encouraging of skepticism. Like,
yeah, it's fundamental. Yeah, it is basically the anti-dogma. It's one of those, like... And again, with Buddhism, if you fail to live well to the Noble Eightfold Path, you're not going to hell for it. There is the idea of the hells in Buddhism. It's a very unsavory rebirth state. But some view it far more metaphorical, while others view it more literal. But even in a literal sense, it is impermanent. You still transition out of it. So it's one of those, like, you're not being punished by an external entity for your wrong view. You're punishing yourself for your wrong view. And I feel like that has a sort of anti-dogmatic principle, because it's kind of hard to form a dogma around, like, all right, well, you made your bed, now lay in it kind of thing. You know, like... Anything else anybody like to add?
Happy full moon day.
Full moon day. All right, I guess that's all for this one. Next time we'll be picking up on chapter 10 with right thinking.